the DAWbench Radio Show, the official podcast of DAWbench.com.
Welcome to the DAWbench Radio Show. I am your host, Curigliano of AAVIM Technology in Melbourne, Australia, and I am joined again today, co-hosting by Pete Brown of Microsoft in Maryland in the United States. How you going, Pete?
Good, Vin. Maybe slightly better from you, but better than you. But it sounds like we all have a case of creeping death coming on.
Yeah, I got a bit of a head cold. I've got to thank my oldest son for bringing home some white death. Thank you very much. So I'll be coughing and spluttering and sounding like a bit of a Model T for the rest of the show. But I'm okay.
That's good. We can have a bingo game for that, or maybe a drinking game, right?
Well, as long as the timeout buzzer doesn't hit the show again, I'll be happy, mate. Now, also co-hosting the show again today is Erin McKimm in Melbourne, Australia. Erin, how you doing, man?
I'm good, thanks, Finn. How you doing? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Look, I'm doing okay, man. I'm doing okay. I got the lurg out of the throat. Now, last but not least, and waiting in the wings is our special guest today, and that is Justin Frankel, who is the founder and lead developer of Reaper, which is still one of the most popular and widely used DAWs in the world. And he's joining us from New York, I believe.
That's right. Hello.
Hey, Justin. How you doing, man? Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Now, do you believe it's been 5 years since the last time we sat down and had a bit of a chat?
What is time anyway?
Yeah.
I don't know. It feels like it was not that long, but it also feels like a really long time ago. I'm not entirely sure what I believe. But yeah, that sounds about right, I guess.
Yeah. Well, look, the world's been through, we'll call it some circus events over the last 5 years. And there's plenty of stuff that's been happening in good old music tech land as well. And so since the last time we spoke, Reaper was at version 5. It was getting kind of towards the end of version 5 because version 6 came out in December 2019. And that's actually when I released the show because we recorded it in August, but I was traveling. I was in the US for a little while. And then by the time we finished editing and everything, it was posted in November. So that was around the same time as version 6. Now, with Reaper, and just real quickly, right? You've had a milestone release with Reaper 7 in let me see, October last year.
Well, I mean, the thing to remember is that the major versions in Reaperland don't really mean that much. It's just a convenient time to update it, and sometimes we'll put things in there that are bigger changes, but where people will be ready to expect things to change. But for the most part, most of our major things that happen throughout the process. So we added more things, after 6.0 than we did in 6.0. It's just, it's we're always doing something interesting or not interesting. But the major versions are really just pretty arbitrary in that regard.
Yeah, well, that's one of the points I want to make is that with version 5, for example, you had 99 updates. So you just ran out of numbers. So the next...
Did we get to 5.99? I don't think we actually did.
You did. I checked.
Did we? Yeah.
5.99, and I'm thinking, well, I think the next one's going to be, unless it's 5.99, 0.12, it's going to go to 6. So you went to your 5.99.
Yeah, no, we did. You're right. Yeah, but we did actually. I mean, we did have some 5.987, 986.
Oh, so you did.
So
and that's one of the points that I want to make. In relation to not only the version numbers, because it's not like you know, we'll call them the more traditional DAWs. They'll have a version revision. They might update it every year. Sometimes they have a 0.5 release, and in between those, they may have 3 to 5, maybe 7 maintenance updates. Where you guys are just pumping updates all the time, updates. And yes, there are bug fixes, but like you said, during that product run, you introduced a stack of stuff. There was a stack of features got introduced in version 6 as well, right? And again, like you said, you know, version 7 wasn't necessarily this, you know, this milestone, so to speak, except that you didn't make it to 6.99 this time, Justin.
Yeah, I think that's the 5.99 was an anomaly, because I don't think, you know, in the 4 series we didn't get there either. In version 3 we didn't get there. So, you know. Yeah.
Well, with 6.83. So look, we can safely say that the last 2 revisions had 80 to 100 updates within that version range. Now, the other thing that I do want to mention is, with your licensing, the license lasts for 2 versions. So if someone had come in at, say, 5.0, they had a license all the way up to 6.99, which is pretty amazing, you know. So when you think about it, and so anyone who buys version 7 now, they've got versions all the way up to 8.99. Now, that's a philosophy that you guys have maintained from the start, I believe.
Yeah, it just was a sort of convenient way of structuring it, because it lets people know that they're going to get updates for a certain amount of time, but then it doesn't really require us to do very much in administration of dealing with, you know, exactly when that is. We can just periodically go and call it a new version. And, you know, ultimately we could abuse it and release 8.0 tomorrow, but we're not going to do that because we don't care. So,
right.
Yeah, it's just sort of like a good compromise in terms of finding a balance between a licensing model that brings us reoccurring revenue and then also doesn't require a ton of administration.
Yeah, and getting 180 some odd updates to a product is pretty good value for your customers, I would think.
Well, hopefully people are happy enough when they buy it that it just works for them. But then, you know, obviously if they find issues that we can address, we prefer to address them.
And I mean, those version, the runs for those versions, version 5 started in 2015. So I've got all the timeline here just so I'm getting this correct. So August 2015 is when 5.0 was released, and that went all the way to December 2019. So that's a 4-year run. Version 6, 2019 to 20. Yeah. So it's about, traditionally it's about a 4-year run.
Judging by those data points, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
It probably was faster earlier on, and as you know, time goes on, we tend to slow down and be like, oh, I guess we should probably look at doing a major release at some point.
Justin, with all those updates, what's your support for your customers like? Like, I would think that would be challenging for you all, unless you can get everybody on the latest one.
I don't know if updates really have an impact on the support burden. Yeah, I mean it doesn't matter that much.
So your folks don't need to keep 99 versions of the product kicking around for support calls and stuff.
Well, it's easy enough for us to go and install it if we need to, you know, verify an issue or something like that. But you know, most people that we talk to on support are using the latest version or close enough, the latest major version that, you know, they can upgrade to easily.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what kind of things do you do in those besides besides just the bug fixes? Like, cause you have some features and stuff in there too.
Yeah. I mean, it's really whatever we kind of feel like doing. So it could be a lot of things. off the top of my head.
How about in V7? Like, what are some of the new features you've got in there?
The new major features in V7. We have like lanes for tracks, so you can use them to comp. So you can record, instead of recording items in takes, you can record items that are in lanes, and then you can easily comp between them and switch comps and things like that. So that's one of the major things that we put in it. I personally still use takes when I'm recording multi-take stuff, but for some things, it definitely is handy to have the track lanes. We did a lot of like increases to internal limits. So it used to be that tracks were limited to 64 audio channels, and we upped that to 128. Similarly, we increased the MIDI bus support to 128 buses, increased like the number of hardware devices, MIDI hardware devices you could use, things like that. We added like a bunch of modes where you can essentially, it's funny, Reaper started out as being this sort of like toolless mode of editing, and, you know, modeled after Vegas and whatnot. But as time goes on, it's like you find ways of improving upon that. And so we actually added modes where you can have different states that you can put the user interface into, so that if you wanted to have different styles of editing, you could, but they're all completely customizable. So if you want to have a mode where, you know, when you click, it splits automatically, you could set up a toolbar button or a key command and switch to that mode, and then do a bunch of things, and then switch back to the normal editing mode, things like that.
Oh, nice. Nice.
We added some defaults for that, like in the toolbar, like there's one for razor editing. So if you click the razor editing button, then everything sort of goes into this razor editing centric editing behavior, which is pretty nice. And also you can do it with keyboard commands too. So you can actually have like keyboard shortcuts that activate different modes. So you could have, say, you could effectively have multi-sequenced keystrokes. So you could have like something where if you wanted to map F to be insert effects, and then you could have, once you've hit F, you could then have, you know, the number 1 be if you want to insert an EQ, or the number 2 be if you want to insert a compressor or whatever. So if you run out of keyboard shortcuts, you could go and you know, just have these categories of things that then you could very quickly navigate through, which is pretty handy. We did more improvements on the audio routing side. Like you can have FX containers, which can contain other effects. And then you can choose to map parameters externally, and internally you can link them. So you can kind of create these meta effects, or like you could make a channel strip out of multiple plugins and then keep them contained in a container.
I was wondering what the FX containers were. So it's just like what you're saying, and it takes you know, all the settings for the plugins and everything else and packages it all up into one unit.
Yeah. And then you can also choose what is, you know, how it's exposed to the parent chain, and you can also do parallel routing of plugins within a container or within a FX chain. So there's a ton of flexibility added there that is pretty useful.
Well, one of the other features that is associated with the lanes is that I thought was really cool was the swipe comping. I thought that was pretty cool. Now, you know, if comping is your thing, so to speak, you know, where people are looking, you know, an example is if you get the singer to sing 4 or 5 takes of the same part, and then you select the best component of each take, and just how easily that was, just sort of swipe that one there, swipe that, you know, and then it just joins it into that bottom lane. I thought that was pretty cool. Now, you mentioned razor edits. Yeah, that was something that myself and Erin were talking about, because I was trying to get my head around it, and then I kind of hit Erin up, and I've gone, "Hey, Erin, have you seen these?" And I know that Erin's been kind of diving into them of late. Erin, you there, mate?
Yeah, razor edit's an interesting one, Justin. I've kind of slept on that whole feature. until actually preparing for the podcast, and because I'm using like a kind of a custom theme, so didn't have the mouse modifiers or anything set up. So I set it up, and I was just amazed how useful the feature is. It took me quite a while to get my head around it, but yeah, I was just wondering where the inspiration came for Razor Edits, because it's really a game changer, I think, particularly it's going to be for my workflow going forward with automation and just editing in general. I think it's going to save a heap of time. So I was just interested about where that, the inspiration for that feature came from.
The specifics of that, Schwa actually did most of that development.
Right.
But it was a long process with just a lot of user feedback and discussion. So, I think a lot of it is a function of that. Ultimately, okay. It's the collective wisdom of a couple hundred very enthusiastic Reaper users.
Right.
Now, we did ask this question the last time, and every interview I've heard you do, they ask the same question of the features. Is it really community driven, or is it a combination of what you and Schwa think would be cool, or how do you actually?
Well, I don't think there are ever. I think it's very rare that you would find features that we would add that we don't think are worth adding.
Right.
So it's ultimately, do we think something's worth adding? And there are a lot of different paths to that, to that conclusion. And some of them can be seeing other people wanting something and then understanding why it's useful and valuable to them. And some of it's that it's just would be cool. Some of it's that we want to use them in our own personal Reaper using. And then also, I guess there's the category of, well, if we've done all of these other things, we might as well just round it out and make it, do this other thing too. Like, for example, there's batch converter in Reaper, and it's gradually gotten extended so you can do more and more things with it, like, taking a multi-channel file and splitting it to single channel. And then it's like, well, if you're going to do that, you must have it be able to support single channel and convert them back to multi-channel and all those sort of things. So, there's that kind of feature creep. And in general, those things end up being, relatively straightforward anyway, once you're making something general purpose enough.
Yeah.
I might have had the order of those backwards. I don't even remember anymore, but, yeah, those sort of things. And those are the kind of things where it's probably only going to ever be used by like 20 people. But then it's like, well, it's not that much work. It's not that much code. Might as well, be as powerful as possible.
And it's 20 very happy people. So I think,
yeah,
hopefully. Yeah.
Another one I stumbled on just recently was the time stretch algorithm. I don't know how you pronounce it, RIA or whatever, and it's like
the
sounds kind of like RIA, that, yeah, and it kind of sounds a bit like what Paul Stretch does. It's amazing, yeah. And so that, like, for something like that, was that a like a community driven idea, or was that just a cool sound that you guys came up with?
I mean, I'm as far as I know, it is roughly the same algorithm as Paul Stretch. But that was, I was actually making something for my own. Like I do have like a setup that I use for doing looping, improvisation, and stuff. And as part of that, I made a sort of like, what is it? Spectral hold. So you go and I have a fader where I can like if I'm playing an audio signal, I can put the fader up and it starts mixing in the spectral, analysis of the signal to a buffer. And it was producing these really nice kind of, sustained sounds. Cool. And then, and once I was doing that, I was like, well, it would be very easy to just make this into a time stretch engine. Just, mix in new, audio at a certain interval and with certain parameters. So then, and that spectral hold I wrote was in the JSONic or JSFX, language. So then I ended up just porting it to C++ and playing around with it as a time stretch engine in Reaper, and it was really fun to play with, and you could make all sorts of cool textures. So then, I think that was pretty much driven by my own creative impulse. There may have been some feedback as far as things that parameters to tweak and things like that, but it was mostly that.
Yeah, it's like I keep finding these things in Reaper. It's like this kind of all these Easter eggs, and I use pull stretch a lot for sound design, and I'm like, I could have just done this so easily now in Reaper, and there's lots of options there to play around with. So yeah, that's a really cool one, I reckon.
That one's kind of fun too, because I published the source code to it somewhere, and it's like I think it's maybe 60 or 70 lines. It's really not that much code.
Wow. When
you have all of the FFT library and everything else that you need for it. But it's like, it's actually one of those things where it's really satisfyingly concise, to do some cool effects like that.
Yeah. I mean, you can just turn anything into a beautiful ambient sound. But like, being able to do it in Reaper, as opposed to I still use the real old pull stretch executable file, but just being able to just grab something and stretch it and flip that on is just it's going to be a lot of fun to play with that one.
Cool.
Definitely. Yeah.
That was something that was added in the middle of 6.0 somewhere, I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you need to, Erin, you need to turn Vin's outro into a long ambient track now.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, well, this thing, you could actually make it go for a couple of days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
No, Vin does that anyway, right? So, so you don't need to stretch there.
The comedian has entered the room. Yeah,
we're going to pick on you because you can't talk too well today with this cold.
Mate,
so.
you kiss. It's just par for the course. Hey, Justin, if I may, now one of the features that I saw that was added around that version 6 cycle, within that version 6 cycle, was the surround panner. Now, that kind of raises the question, is there surround support in Reaper natively? And then that just leads on to another question that I know that Erin has spoken to me about, is that there's a lack of mono audio tracks. So I wonder if we can kind of maybe discuss that in connection with each other.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess the real thing is there surround support in Reaper? Well, yes and no. There's a lot of support for multi-channel audio, and Reaper doesn't define multi-channel audio formats for like the track, for example. When you render, you can specify, there's metadata that can be added, but you are sort of ultimately responsible for, if you use our surround panner, you have to specify the channel format, and then you have to get it right when you go and render with metadata. And if you're routing it to your speakers in a room, then you have to make sure you get the channel ordering right there as well. So it doesn't make it easy, but it is there. And to the extent that other third-party plugins support surround, it kind of, well, I should say, supporting multi-channel audio in surround formats with all of the plugin formats that exist today is kind of a mess, and it's difficult for the plugin manufacturers. It's difficult for the hosts. It's a rough spot in digital audio at this point. But I guess it's something that people tolerate or deal with.
Yeah, and so with the lack of mono channels, was that a specific design choice back in the day, or? Yeah,
I mean, it ultimately was. There was a design choice to make all tracks in Reaper always have an even number of channels. And it's something we could change, but I don't think there's really any real reason to. I mean, ultimately you put a mono plugin on a stereo track, what is the real downside to carrying a second channel around?
So when you said a design choice, is this a programming design choice or a UI choice, or?
Yeah, like both, I guess. Yeah. I mean, at a fundamental level, it was a programming choice, but then, you know, from a UI perspective, then you have to sort of live with those constraints. But yeah, I mean, I guess the real thing is that is something that could be added. However, it isn't really, I'm not sure what the real advantage of it would be.
Right.
Right.
I guess the question would be what, you know, what are you looking for in mono tracks? That's the real question.
Yeah, I might jump in there. Like, it was just more about the concept of using a mono track going into a stereo bus and the kind of the pan laws. But I know that you guys changed some options with the pan laws quite a while back, and I went through and did comparisons and kind of broke down exactly how to set up the channels so that they would function like, you know, Cubase or Pro Tools, etc. It's just this kind of different concept of, like, you know, say in Pro Tools or in Cubase, you got a mono track, or in Studio One or whatever. And it's like, it's literally a single stream of audio, and just the way the pan law interacts with a stereo bus or a multi-channel bus. And it was just a kind of extra level of complexity, I guess, when needing to kind of convert that into a stereo track on Reaper, depending on how your pan laws were set. So that was basically just, yeah, it was more the way of thinking about audio, I think, and coming from, you know, thinking like a traditional mixing desk with a, you know, you've got a single stream of audio, or stereo is actually two streams of audio as opposed to a single stream.
That's ultimately sort of, I guess, the double-edged sword of Reaper's one kind of track thing is that, you know, you have all these different attributes that a track can have, and you have to actually, you're responsible for configuring them as such. Totally. So if you want to have a, you know, if you want to have a mono track that behaves like a mono track, but you actually have other audio channels to, say, do some other side chaining or do other things with, then you have that option. You just have to set the pan law according to as you need.
Exactly. Yeah. And I guess it was just that thing of, once I kind of nutted it out and figured out like how to kind of recreate that, you can do it. Absolutely. Yeah. But it was just, it wasn't as obvious, I guess, when I was first trying to figure it out. That was all. But then it didn't really like affect the mix, so to speak, because, you know, you kind of adjust things by ear anyway. It was just more probably, you know, compatibility of having to deliver into other DAWs or whatever, that kind of thing, where it kind of got a bit confusing. But then, you know, as I said, I nutted it out, and I have my map of exactly how to set it up to recreate that kind of workflow. So that was fine.
Yeah. So have we finished talking about the mono, guys, do you think?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to bring up probably an extension to the surround, and it's going to be the A word. I'm sorry, Justin.
Ambisonics, I assume?
No.
Right.
Atmos. Right.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And I know you kind of everyone's kind of going sigh. You know.
All the sighing here is cracking me up. Everyone's like,
look, and the reason I'm sighing is that, you know, while I'm sure Justin has been navigating this at his end, we've been navigating it. You know, there was, how long? Erin brought it up. I mean, this is probably 4 years.
Erin, your fault.
Yeah, about 4 years ago, he brought it up with me. Remember, in that conversation? Then I said to you, Pete, going, "Hey, listen, why there's not really a lot of Atmos support on Windows?" And then you had a chat to Dolby about it, and then, you know, the answer was a bit kind of ambiguous. Is that the word? Where they've just said, well, we haven't really had any call for it, so we're not really going to be developing for it on Windows. And I'm like, well, isn't it a chicken and egg type of thing?
Meanwhile, the other DAWs were implementing it themselves. So.
Yeah, Nuendo, Cubase, even Eve and DaVinci Resolve Free had
Right.
had Atmos in it.
So obviously there was a call for it, just nobody was calling Dolby and asking them specifically for it, you know, like.
Well, and again, the reason I'm sighing is that if we go back 12 months, it was like almost reaching a hysterical level. Remember at NAMM, Pete, that every booth had Atmos. This year it was AI, right? But last year it was Atmos.
Year before that was AVB, I think. So like every year it's something du jour.
It's starting with an A. So Justin, and I'm not sure how loud your sigh was, but can
you give us a reenactment, Justin, of your sigh, please?
Oh God. Can you give us your views on Atmos from your perspective?
If it was something that we could implement that would be reasonable, and the problem with Atmos is that the technology and the business are inextricably linked, and that makes it a very unattractive proposition for a company like ours.
Right. I hear you.
Which isn't to say that we won't ever implement it, or support for it or anything. It's more that makes it difficult.
Right. Okay. But I mean, at a technical level, I don't think it would be that, well, actually, no, it would be an enormous amount of work, I suppose. But I mean, you got the surround panner in there. So is it a couple of degrees of separation between that and Atmos? This is where Erin's going to come in, because Erin is the Atmos man.
Well, I mean, I think generally, my opinion as a human, not as a, not from a business side, but that Atmos is generally a solution in search of a problem. And I don't really care.
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah. Justin, I mean, we've had numerous discussions about, well, who's the target market? You know, who's the target market? Because I'm saying, well, probably the only thing I really want to listen to in Atmos would be Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon, you know, or maybe, you know, the old War of the Worlds. Remember Jeff Wayne's, Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds, something like that, you know. I don't want to listen to Tay-Tay in Atmos.
Right. I listened to, you know, I got a pair of Apple AirPod Pro things, and they gave me an Apple Music trial subscription with it, and I used it, and it's great. And then I started listening to some things, and I was like, and then I was moving my head around, and I was like, oh, this is terrible. and then I turned off the Atmos support, and it was so much better.
Yeah, they don't call it Atmos though. What do they call it?
Well, it's
Apple Spatial
two-speaker Atmos, so it's not really
spatial audio.
Atmos.
But it is. But they use the spatial. You know, they use the motion tracking and stuff. But in Apple Music, I'm pretty sure it does say Atmos, and you can opt out of that and just hear the stereo stream like it was, you know, like God intended, and it was better.
Yeah.
Good for movies. I don't get the appeal of listening to music in it, but cool for movies. And Pink Floyd, as Vin was bringing up.
Yeah, I think certain kinds of music would lean better towards it than others.
Yeah.
You know, like maybe immersive ambient, or, you know, that kind of thing, maybe.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Basically Pink Floyd without the singing at that point. So
yeah, yeah, and without the jazz cigarettes, you know. But
so you think?
You think? Well, look, you know, Pink Floyd had the 360-degree sound back in 1972 or something, you know. So it was.
But they also had flying pigs, which was cool.
Yeah, which actually it broke its tether and took off into some air traffic. Created havoc in the air traffic lanes. Oh boy, what a classic! So, but with Atmos, Erin, you were saying that there is an avenue to get it into Reaper. What's that third party app? What's it called?
Is it Fieldler Audio? I think.
Is that the one? Yep.
Yeah. So there's like a version of it, Essentials, I think, that's free to get now. They've made it free, and you can integrate that with anything, like including Reaper, and it will actually let you mix Atmos. with that. So it's already kind of, if you wanted to do Atmos in Reaper, you can already.
So how does that, is it a plugin?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of plugins. So it's like got the renderer, and then it's got, I haven't actually really used it. I think like a beam plugin. So you basically put a plugin on the insert of a channel or of a track, and then that will then link to the renderer, which is, I think, sits out maybe on the master or something like that. And then you can render the mix that way. So
that's doing some gymnastics there. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like, from all accounts, it's quite easy to use. You can just, group tracks together, and it can allow you to create object beds. So Atmos is kind of limited with the main bed is like 7.1.2, but a lot of mixers will use 7.1.4, and they'll actually create the bed out of objects to give them the additional 2 ceiling channels. So yeah, this particular software makes it very easy to kind of adapt your kind of setup, even to 9.1.6 or whatever. So quite flexible. So it's already there, I guess, if people want it.
Yeah.
Nice. That actually sounds similar to what we would probably do if we were to implement it natively anyway. So
yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Well, look, if it's there and the solution's there, and look, I don't know how many Reaper end users are going to be diving into Atmos. I don't think the wheels have fallen off it yet, but I've got to tell you, I've been hearing less and less of it from clients, because there was a period there where that's all I was hearing. I need an Atmos setup. I need an Atmos setup. And I helped a couple of clients configure that, and they have been doing some Atmos mixing.
I think once Spotify implement it, it might change things. So, I mean, there's a lot of music being mixed in it and remixed in it at the moment.
But pretty soon we'll just be able to ask ChatGPT to generate Atmos for us, and then we won't have to do anything.
Yeah.
It's still required for Netflix, right? Because I think that's what they were requiring for all their new stuff for a bit.
Sure.
For all their shows?
Yeah, I thought it was they were requiring Atmos mixes for new shows.
Yeah, I think that's what's kind of...
I read that somewhere.
That kind of kicked it off, but did they actually maintain that?
I don't know. I haven't heard anything since then.
No, I don't think so. But that was one of the things that I think in that early discussion with Erin, when it was that if you do any sound or music for a Netflix series or a show, that you had to provide an Atmos mix.
Right.
Yeah, I don't reckon they maintained that, Pete, to tell you the truth. But again, look, I haven't personally experienced. I'm not going to go buying any Apple headphones to kind of listen to my music that isn't that I'll get very limited benefit from. But look, for the people that are enjoying it, more power to them. But I have to say the noise cancellation on the AirPod Pros is pretty amazing. Actually, it works really well.
Yeah, I've heard they're really good.
Yeah.
Are they the headphones that you have, or the earbuds?
The ones I have are the earbuds. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I heard they're really good. Actually, even their bass response is quite good.
Yeah, I've been very impressed with them.
Yeah. So I could ask you, what music did you enjoy listening to in Atmos? But I think the answer was none of it.
Well, I didn't really give it a fair chance, but I listened to enough where I was like, no.
Yeah.
It was not appealing. So
no, there you go. I think we can move on from the A word. Now I do want to ask you some technical stuff, just for a little bit more of a deep dive. We did take a bit of a deep dive 5 years ago when we were discussing hybrid playback engines, and I'm going to start hearing some sighing, I think. But and I would have thought. Actually, no, sorry. I wouldn't have thought 5 years on we'd still be discussing hybrid playback engines and the varying efficiencies. But it's an area that has evolved, and not in a good way, Justin. I may add that the numerous.
Well, that was very pointed.
Yeah.
Just call them right out.
Yeah. Well, in numerous hybrid playback engines, the premise was always that the non-time critical tracks are running in they're floating around the larger buffer, and so it actually takes a lot of load off the DAW, and the only time that you're getting into that mission critical, time critical, is when you're track arming. So the premise was great, and it kind of worked, but it just seems to me that that's getting more and more complicated and convoluted for some reason, and I'm not interested in discussing the other DAWs, because they can sit there and navigate that minefield for themselves, right? But the one engine that's actually maintained the performance and the dynamic has been Reaper, right? So I just want to quickly cover, and from a non-code perspective, and just in the practical sense, this is how I see how the engine is different, right? So when I say traditional hybrid playback engines that are running on a higher usually a playback buffer, and how that translates in practicality is, for example, and this is a perfect example, right, is that if you are running a large virtual instrument session, and we'll just take my DAWbench VI session, for example, and if and you load that up at the respective buffer settings, so let's say 64 to 512, and you will get between that, just in playback, nothing with no track arming, right? So it's on the non-critical elements. There's about a 1% difference, right, between 64 to 512. In Reaper, even though you have the AFX extended buffering, there is I worked this out. What was it? It was nearly 4 times the variance. So there's about a 300% variance, right? So the reason I bring this up is that, people, I'll call them my fans from the gallery, have crossed their arms over the years and just said, why are you even bothering trying to present data within Reaper at respective buffer settings when it's floating around in a 200 millisecond hybrid playback buffer? And I'm just saying, but it's not, right? Because the practicality is that there is still a component where the engine within that AFX extended buffer is working on the hardware block buffer. And it will vary depending on what that block buffer is set at. And so the engine scales very, very differently to what I call the traditional hybrid playback engines. Now, is that making any sense?
Yeah, I mean, because so if you suppose you have some hybrid system where, regardless of the audio buffer block size, you run your virtual instruments at 1,024 samples, right? That means that for every 1,024 samples, for each plugin, you make a call to that plugin saying, process this block, here are some MIDI events, and then you get back the processed audio from it, right? So there's that amount of overhead on top of the work that the plugin actually has to do. And with Reaper, with its anticipative FX processing, it still processes each block at the audio buffer, audio hardware's buffer size. So for 1,024 samples, if you're at 64 sample buffers, it's going to call that plugin the 16 times or whatever it is.
Right.
So all of that work that when you're rendering 64 samples at a time, there's going to be a fixed amount of work of overhead that you're going to be like setting everything up and calling into the plugin and then letting the plugin do its processing and returning it back. So the downside is that there will be more of that fixed overhead per block, and you're going to be processing more blocks per second to the plugin, which which will result in more overhead at smaller buffer sizes.
Right.
There are other advantages to a smaller buffer size. If a plugin doesn't support sample accurate automation, then you get better accuracy there. Another thing is that, CPUs have caches, and at a certain point, a buffer size large enough, things start not fitting in cache, and you end up spending more time thrashing the cache, pulling things from main memory, waiting around for that. Probably not at 1024 samples, but on a 128 channel track at 1024 samples, if each sample is 8 bytes, then you're talking a megabyte of memory, and that could be outside the cache depending on the system. So there are trade-offs involved.
Yep.
For sure.
And that's interesting that you bring up the cache, because that is something that I spoke to Justin Storer, who's the man behind Juice, and he's also the man behind the Traction DAW.
Julian.
Yeah, Jules. What did I say?
Yeah.
Justin.
Oh, sorry, Justin. I got Justin on the brain. I was speaking to Jules Storer, and he mentioned the caches as well, where, Dave, I'm not sure, I can't remember David's surname, but David is the guy that is the main guy behind the optimization on that Traction audio engine. And he was mentioning flooding the caches as well if you start using larger buffers. Now, they don't have any hybrid or extended buffering at all. Their engine is always running in the real time. And it's actually quite efficient, Justin. It's actually a really nice little engine. So, but they mentioned the caches as well. So I found that interesting that you mentioned that. And because what I'm seeing is that with the we'll call them more traditional hybrid engines, it doesn't matter whether they've got 24 milliseconds, 34 milliseconds, 80, 90 milliseconds. That hybrid engine is actually collapsing for some reason prematurely. And you're probably using 10, 15% of your CPU resources, and the audio engine has collapsed. And I'm wondering if that has something to do with the caches being flooded. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I'm just sitting there trying to navigate the practicality of it. But it's not something that I'm seeing in Reaper. And the actual overall performance of the Reaper engine in not only the empirical environments that I do with the DAWbench, but also one of the recent projects that we've been doing is that we've been porting over real-world sessions for that clients have that, are based on, like a large mix that has, quite a large number of tracks, grouping, buses, effects sends. And so there's all of that in combination. And the things are just exhausting some of those playback engines way too prematurely, where Reaper just sits there and almost shakes it off like, there you go. And then we can add, like, for example, I did a session where I loaded it to the point where it was just on break for these modern AMD and Intel machines. So the session itself was, there might have been, I don't know, maybe 5-10% left on the respective DAW audio engine, all right? Not in CPU, because there was heaps of CPU. And then I actually, in that real-world session, I added some incremental plugins just on the last of the busing to see how much further we could push it. And Reaper loaded an additional 70 plugins over the top of some of the other DAWs. And I mean, that's not small, Justin. That's just an enormous amount of additional processing power in a real world environment. And when I say 70 plugins, they weren't small. They were kind of some modeled vintage compressors. And where the other DAWs, we might be able to get an extra 7, 8, and then there's Reaper adding close to 80, That's not a small thing. So, yeah.
So Justin came out of this cleanly then, because I know there was some anticipation there at the beginning, but that was Vin's way of saying you done good, Justin.
Well, thank you, and I hope that all users have the same experience.
Well, look, and the thing is, Justin, and we discussed this in the last show. You know, the actual performance of the engine is never questioned, you know, and people are just saying, look, you know, I've tried to use Reaper and they just can't get their head around it, you know, and so that doesn't necessarily mean that if you're using another DAW, that you just immediately go over to Reaper, because it just you might not gel with it, you know, but there's no denying that if you're at a mix stage and you've got an extra 30, 40, 50% resource that you can actually tap into, that's not a small amount, you know. So that's just the best way for me to say is that the Reaper engine has remained consistent, the others haven't. All right, so that's the best way for me to kind of close off on that. Regards the hybrid, or not the hybrid, the Anticipative FX engine, and I do have to just mention in the performance meter. And I can't remember it was in during the version 6 development cycle. You actually added a metric of 10C. You remember that?
Yeah, we have different units available where
that was an eye opener for me. All right.
So what's 10C, Vin?
Well, perhaps I can explain actually, and because I think now there are different modes of viewing processing power consumption, and the traditionally Reaper would show you the percentage of the total CPU power available. So 100% would be using all of your cores fully utilized, and separately from that, there was the real-time CPU use, but that is a different metric. But what we did is we changed it so you could view, originally the new mode was that you could view it as a percentage of a CPU core. So if it said 1.0C, then something was using one CPU core, of processing power. And then eventually it kind of made sense just to have the option of saying 100% C, which would be 100% of a core, so that if people, you know, like percentages, which are a lot easier to deal with. So having these different view modes let you see things in a differently meaningful way. Because sometimes you actually care about, like, if a plugin is using 0.1% of total, what does that even mean? Whereas if a plugin's using, you know, 10% of a core, then you realize, you know, that is a meaningful thing. Because also, you know, plugin can't, if a plugin doesn't use its own threading, it can't use more than a single core. So if you display that as using 10% of the total, like, you don't know if it's actually maxing out or not.
Yeah.
Hence the core display is useful.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. And this is actually per track as well. Let's just make a point of that. So you can actually visualize the 10C value per track. And it's going to lead into the next point I'm going to make about the serial, once you start loading plugins in serially on an insert or a bus. Now, the other metric that I really like on that performance meter is the real-time block buffer, because it's not, and we have to stipulate this, it's actually the nominal block buffer of whatever the hardware buffer setting is. So say, for example, it's 64, it would be 1.45 from memory, right? So 1.45, and that's your block buffer. And as you're building up, you know, the processing on the session, you're watching that 1.45, which is on the right-hand side of the readout. And then on the left-hand side it could be sitting at 0.1, 0.3. And as that starts approaching the block buffer size, once you exceed it, then you've got the risk of a buffer underrun. Now, am I correct there? Is that explanation reasonably close, Justin?
Well, there are a couple of figures. There's the RT CPU use, which is sort of the average amount of time that it spends. So if each of your block is 2 milliseconds, just to make it easier, and it's spending an average of 1 millisecond processing each audio block, then you theoretically have about 50% headroom in terms of processing power. Headroom. That's not a good term to use because it's confusing. Sorry. But the thing to keep in mind is also that if you use the anticipative FX processing, usually it doesn't end up using very much of the real-time CPU use. So you get that. So you can keep adding things, and if they're not being input monitored, they will generally not contribute to that. So that's the average. The other factor that you mentioned when you actually said that it said milliseconds is that it is the longest block.
That's the one. That's the one. Sorry,
that's the one, because it doesn't matter if you average less than the thing. The moment you have a block that exceeds the amount of time you have, then you have the potential for a problem.
Yep.
And so yeah, that is the thing. And it's not even exceeding. It's honestly, it's getting, if you get close to it, like you probably are fine at 90% of it, but once you start getting, very close to the amount of time that the buffer is, then there's a very good likelihood you'll hear something.
Yeah, you'll hear. Yeah. And just that metric, the longest block, and the 1C, those two have been invaluable for me, because I can tell when the engine is getting very, very close to tipping over. So, I'm incrementally just, loading these DAWbench sessions. I know when I'm getting close. And the other interesting thing, because I was actually playing with this yesterday with AFX on and off, just to kind of get my head around what the percentage variances are with the engine running under that Anticipative FX and just running natively on the real time. And I was noticing that it could comfortably sit above the real time longest block value for a period. It would edge over, right? And I still wasn't hearing anything, and there was no buffer underruns, and it'd drop itself back down again. So there's obviously, you've got a little bit of leeway there. It doesn't immediately actually drop the audio, not that I could hear anyway. But it has been invaluable for me with that one. Now, the 10C, where the best way to visualize this is, say, if you start serially loading a bus, and so you start, vertically loading the plugins, you will see that 10C value go up, and as soon as it gets above 10, that's it. The engine's over, right? You'll hear a clip in the engine. It doesn't matter whether you're only using 3 or 4, 5% of processing on your task manager. It has actually exceeded that one core. But here's the thing, and this is the conversation that we had a couple of years back, because I kind of dove head first into the serial processing side of things with multiple different DAWs. This is, again, the feedback from the gallery that was saying that I needed to focus more on, forget about the multi-processing and the parallel processing. We needed some way of actually measuring the serial processing of these respective DAWs. And if you remember, the confusion for me was that I started loading, a serial process in a bus, expecting to see this spiked core, and I wasn't. It was load balancing, and so I remember asking the question, "Hey, Justin, is the serial process somehow being parallelized?" And you went through a couple of emails and you explained it to me, and it's not parallelizing, it's actually load balancing, and there was a very specific difference. Can you please explain that? Because, for anyone that you can easily do this test, you fire up Reaper and you have It doesn't matter whether it's a track or a bus, and you just sit there and start loading serial plugins. And then the beauty of Reaper as well is that you've got unlimited insert slots. So because some of these current CPUs, you're going to need almost 30 odd inserts before this thing is actually tipping. All right.
Yeah, sure. So load balancing is probably not the accurate description of it.
Okay. Yep.
But so what you have is if you have a track and it takes for every, 2 millisecond block you want to process, it takes 2 milliseconds of CPU power. Then it's going to take one CPU core's worth of CPU time to process it. So suppose you have to process the 500 blocks per second. Then in each second, each block will get processed in sequence. There'll be 500 of them. Mm-hmm. However, the way a multitasking operating system works, each of those calls may not happen on the same CPU core. The OS may choose to run 200 of them on one core, 200 of them on another core, etc. But only one of them can run at any given time because each one is dependent on the output of the previous one.
Right.
So as a result, you may have it running across multiple cores, but just in different time slices, not simultaneously. So you still have the same ultimate limit in terms of the processing power that is available to you.
Right. So you're still limited to 10C
right.
total load. And where this was confusing for me is that there's just no visual feedback of that. There's just, because
right.
if you're looking at a task manager, all you're seeing is the load just really evenly going across pretty much all the available cores.
Because it's showing you an average. If
right.
it showed you the instantaneous load, not that actually exists, but if it was a small enough window, if it showed you the load over the course of a millisecond, then it would show you one core with, fully loaded. Not that measurement in that time frame is really possible, though Pete would probably know more about that than I do. But yeah, so it's showing you an average, which is this nice, beautiful, evenly distributed thing that doesn't reflect the real time nature of it. Yeah.
Right. Pete?
Yes. Yeah. You wouldn't want to measure. Like at some point, the measurement becomes the task. So you wouldn't want to start measuring things down that low.
It wouldn't be meaningful anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, somebody with really fast eyes might notice.
but you can understand my confusion when I first saw that because it looked like it was parallel processing to me, and the reason that it was so confusing for me is that most of the other DAWs, when you do exactly the same test, because I've got the same test across 4 or 5 different DAWs now, and it's real simple. As soon as you start serial loading, once you start loading the plugins in a serial process on the other DAWs, Justin, they all appear on one core.
Well, I mean, we could, and maybe I'm theorizing about what they would do if they were to pin each of their multiprocessing threads to a particular core, which you can do, and then have a pattern which is some fixed pattern of scheduling of the plugins on different threads. That could make sense that it would happen. There may be advantages to doing that in terms of cache effects and things like that.
Right.
But there also could be downsides to such a scheduling system.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to get right, I think, is it's hard to do that in a way that's more efficient than what somebody else has already done, really.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately you have to trust that the OS, you have people who are really optimizing the OS in order to make things run as quickly as possible in all tasks, and it's best left to the OS ultimately.
Yeah.
One other thing I can actually mention is the scenario you describe of putting all these plugins in order. In the case that you're not using input monitoring, it would be possible to actually parallelize that just by adding latency. So, the first plugin would run and produce some output, and then the second plugin would run in a different thread processing that output while the first plugin's then processing the next block and so on. So you could in theory set something up that would pipeline these effects at the expense of latency in order to get around this sort of limit. And you, to some extent, you can actually do that in Reaper by just using routing between tracks, assuming input monitoring is not on and anticipative effects are enabled.
Right.
But it's something that's not really worth optimizing for, because, I mean, who really puts that much on a single track in order to process it is the question.
Although it does sound a lot like what Noel talked to us about on one podcast. Remember, Vin, in that case, it wasn't necessarily different plugins, but it was chunking up the data, going to one plugin first. And then he was making it small enough to do exactly what Justin was just talking about.
Yeah, well, load balancing or load spreading, I think he actually voiced it. But again, from a non-code perspective, I'm just visualizing what I thought looked like parallel processing. Now, one of the advantages of it actually spreading the load across the cores instead of all landing in one, even though there is only one 0C total across those respective cores, is that if you picture a session that's already reasonably heavy loaded across a lot of those cores, if you start serially loading a bus where it will land on one specific core that already has some preload on it, that's going to have a far higher chance of it clipping and overloading before the environment where it's actually load balancing across the others. If you understand what I'm saying, right? It'd be just the load balancing across all of the available cores is going to give you way more headroom for all of the other processing instead of it all landing on one. So that's the advantage I see.
I think that's only an advantage to the extent that if you were to have a hypothetical system where each thread was constrained to one core and the DAW was responsible for scheduling each track on, and it tried to keep things on the same core, on the same thread, thus the same core, it would have to be able to manage the state where where it intelligently moves it from core to core in order to prevent a single core from getting overutilized. But I think it is assumed that if you did do that, you would have some intelligent algorithm that would prevent these things from being an issue. But at the end of the day, honestly, the OS is really best equipped to do this because it is ultimately designed to.
Right. So the actual thread management within Reaper that is actually doing that load spreading, load balancing, that's not anything specific that you've done. That's the Windows task scheduling that's doing that?
Primarily, yeah. I mean, I think there's a scheduling system within Reaper where each thread will take a section of task, like rendering a track for a particular block. And that is a scheduling system that has few constraints. It uses like a sort of a basic first in, first out kind of thing of each thread gets there and takes the first thing available and so on. So it's possible that you could have, particular plugins being run from one thread and then from another thread and then from a different thread and so on. Similarly, those threads can move from core to core by the OS. So there's two potential layers of how things would be scheduled.
Right.
And both of them, each of them, you could remove, and things would actually behave pretty well. And so if Windows decided to schedule each thread to a particular core, Reaper would actually handle that pretty well. And similarly, if we changed Reaper in order to try to run each plugin in the same thread whenever possible, and we'd have to add a lot of logic in order to make sure that we don't do as you describe and overload a particular thread and thus core, then it would also work well. But we don't do that because it would just be extra work and a lot of ways to get it wrong ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Though I suppose if you did it perfectly, you could probably improve the cache utilization and see some benefit from that. But it might be, you might do it perfectly and see some theoretical improvement, but then have the OS take it away from you by, context switches and moving you to a different core anyway. So
yeah,
right. Or you just see an improvement on a specific model of processor and that's it.
Totally.
Yeah. And just on that with the core switching, and I've discussed this with Pete as well, because I've witnessed that occasionally, and I can't remember the exact context, but it was in these serial tests, and you would see the load shift from one core to another after a certain time, and then you could just see exactly when it was moving from one. And I'm thinking, what the hell is it doing? And I think you've just explained it there, where the OS scheduling can, in some form or some context, actually shifts it from one core to another one.
Well, there's some advantage to that, like from a heat dissipation perspective too. And, and then if you want to talk about the asymmetrical multi-core systems, then there's, if it moves to an efficiency core, then you can save some power use, assuming it's fast enough, things like that.
Yeah. We're getting to those, hybrid architectures, because I know that, and it's been a fair amount of work for all of the DAW developers since we last spoke, with Apple moving to Apple Silicon, and they've got the big little, and then Intel moving to these hybrid processors that have the performance cores and the economy cores. So I think it'd be good if we can discuss that a little bit now. And just from a practical point, and I don't have any experience on the Mac, so you could probably fill us in a little bit there. But the way that I'm seeing Reaper is behaving in regards to thread management to these hybrid Intel CPUs on Windows is that via the thread director, it is behaving exactly as you would expect, in that it will primarily land on the performance cores and it'll start saturating those performance cores, but then it'll wake the E cores, and Reaper actually load balances in a parallelized session. It actually load balances across all of the CPUs. It's better than any of the other DAWs. That's probably the best way to explain it. It actually utilizes those E cores quite well, Justin. I remember when I was saying, we could get an extra 70 plugins on top of some of the other DAWs. I think the utilization of those E cores is partly that. That is where we're seeing some benefit, where some of the other DAWs are not utilizing those E cores as well, if at all. Do you have anything that you can detail there for us?
I don't know what the other DAWs are doing on Windows. I am familiar with the Apple Silicon CPUs, and basically on Windows, Reaper pretty much is agnostic to the relative strengths and weaknesses of each core.
Right.
So it's ultimately just relying on the OS to do the appropriate thing. And so I think what you're seeing is that whether if other DAWs aren't seeing that, they probably they may be disabling support for the efficiency cores just to avoid potential issues. I don't really know. That would be conjecture.
Yep.
For the purposes of the Mac OS side, for Apple Silicon, we did have to do some work in order to limit our real-time threads to run on the performance cores, and but we did make the decision to allow the non-real-time threads that do media buffering and do the anticipative FX multiprocessing. We do allow those to run on efficiency cores, and so as a result of that, you can, when really maxing out sessions, you can end up with the efficiency cores being used for effects processing, which does give you an advantage because they are still quite capable cores.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about them, I imagine on both Windows and on Mac OS, is that you will get different readouts for CPU use for a particular plugin, depending on which core it's predominantly running on. So if a plugin uses 1% of a core on a performance core, it might use 2% of a core on an efficiency core, because the efficiency core is capable of fewer instructions per second.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. And look, when I say that the Reaper does utilize the E cores better, this is in my empirical saturation test. You can watch as you're progressively loading a session, and you see when the E cores wake up. So this is all the thread director stuff, but it's in the real world sessions, it tends to definitely prefer the performance cores first, and the only time you start seeing that E core saturation is when you start really pushing past the capability of those performance cores, right?
Which is actually different than what you often see on the Mac side. What's funny is occasionally we've seen posts on the forums where people are like, this plugin uses twice as much CPU when the track is not record armed, but the moment I record arm the track, the CPU uses half.
Yeah,
and they're like, this must be a bug, and then it turns out, when it's not armed, it's running on an efficiency core because it's running ahead of time, and it has that luxury. And then they record arm it, it's like it switches to a performance core, and then suddenly things take half as much processing power.
Right. Yeah, that is interesting. And look, I've watched some videos of some of the YouTube content, the Mac based YouTube content guys, where they were doing the comparative performance across multiple DAWs, and they were showing which ones were actually utilizing the E cores and which ones weren't. It was interesting because it's very, very different. I mean, Logic, for example, would not touch the what do they call them? The small cores, or
if they call them efficiency. Yeah.
Oh, they call them efficiency cores as well.
They're efficiency and performance cores is the terminology is. Yeah.
Okay, it's the same. It's the same as Intel. But the thing is, with the Intel efficiency cores, they're far more powerful than what the Mac efficiency cores are in comparative to the performance cores. So they're still, like, the current Raptor Lake is around a 10th gen IPC, no hyperthreading, but I mean, it's still around a 10th gen IPC. I mean, they call them efficiency cores. I would call them like, they're almost like a middle core, right? And the next generation, the E cores are actually Raptor Lake IPC. So they're going to be very, very, very similar type of performance between the performance and the E cores. And they're dropping hyperthreading altogether. So that's the next gen Intel 15, the 15th gen is going to be really interesting to see how that actually performs. But
if they stay in business long enough.
Yeah.
Just kidding. I'm sure they'll be around forever.
Oh, yeah, mate. The current hysteria, we can go into some detail there, but I've got to tell you, and seeing that you kind of threw that curve at us, the current hysteria that is actually surrounding Intel at the moment with these CPU stability problems and stuff, I've got to tell you, I've personally been following it very, very closely because it's going to impact my business and my clients, obviously, right? And as the hysteria kept building up, I'm keeping in constant contact with my OEM channel, my suppliers, saying, right, are we seeing elevated failures in RMAs? And they're going, no. I've gone, what do you mean? I mean, these guys they're hyperventilating to the point where it's reached the hysterical level that there's going to be a 50 to 100% failure rate. And they're going, no, it hasn't changed. And I can give you the rates, Justin, if you're interested.
No, I was just joking about their, market cap and everything more than anything.
No, but serious. If you're following the YouTube talking heads, you think that there's going to be a 50 and 100% failure rate on all of these current CPUs, and they're going to have to replace them all. It's going to sink them. It could easily sink them, right? But what we're seeing in the channel is, and across Intel and AMD, there's a 1 to 4% failure rate. Intel are at the lower end. AMD have always maintained being at the higher end. Now, I tried to share that information just to try and quell some of the hysteria. And you should have seen the pushback. I'm an Intel shill. Well, of course I'm an Intel shill. You know, I'm saying that just to protect my ass. Why would I actually put my name on something like that unless I've got the information to back it? So, again, we're just constantly monitoring this within supply channels, the larger supply channels, and colleagues that have sold thousands of these CPUs, and we're still seeing about a 1 to 2% failure, which is up from, a 0.5%. Is it up? Yes. Is it going to be 50 to 100%? No. But it has done some damage. And yeah, I don't think they're going anywhere, Justin. They just can't. Could you imagine? I mean, they still. I think they're still.
No, obviously they'll be around. It was a joke.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they supply 80% of the CPU channel. Can you imagine if they go under? Everything would just stop. Anyway, it's. I just thought I'd kind of throw in that one just to.
Justin made a little joke, and Vin's like, "No."
Wow. Yeah. Sorry.
I've seen the abuse you get over that on different places, and it's fun to watch. I'll leave it that way.
Well, it is fun to watch, and considering that the competition had probably one of the most disastrous product launches in living memory at the moment, and they seem to be kind of like Teflon, and they're not getting the same level of hysteria. But let's leave it at that.
I love all the CPUs.
So, Justin, just as a personal question, and what's your preferred platform and OS that you're currently rocking your Reaper in?
Oh boy, there's people getting ready in the comments right now.
No, they're not.
I'm post OS platform. I just actually, that's probably used by people who do everything in the browser, so I can't say that. I do whatever works, really. I think I use everything. The most convenient thing, especially if I'm traveling, is I have an M1 MacBook Air that is pretty great because it's small and then the battery lasts pretty much forever, and I can run Mac OS, I can run UTM and then boot Windows 11 ARM, and I can boot Linux. So I have everything accessible to me. So that's my most convenient computer, I would say.
Yeah, it's like the Swiss Army knife, so you can run everything. So you did mention Linux. Are you spending much time in Linux in 2024?
I do actually. I do most of my recording in Linux, and it's quite nice. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, the last conversation in 2019, you were rocking your Linux install from memory.
Yeah.
Justin, what's because people are going to ask, what's your favorite distro?
Debian. Yeah.
Debian. How did you pronounce it? Debian.
Yeah, I don't know what the correct one is. It's
somebody will tell you.
No one I talk to in real life has ever uttered that word, as far as I know. So,
let me tell you, when it comes to pronunciations, myself and Pete have got this ongoing joke. Where I pronounce Maryland as Maryland, but he loves it that I pronounce it as Maryland.
It sounds so cheerful.
Yeah, it sounds cheerful. And I tried to explain to him that here in Australia, that if you went into a chicken shop and asked for Maryland chicken, they wouldn't know what the fuck we're talking about. Where if you ask,
what is Maryland chicken? Yeah,
Maryland chicken. Yeah, Maryland.
What's that?
We have chicken farms over on the Eastern Shore, so I think that's really what it is.
No, it's chicken pieces.
They're not special chickens, then. They're just chickens who happen to be from Maryland.
Yeah, I think it's some chicken pieces marinated in some concoction.
Probably Old Bay and some other stuff there.
I don't know.
They don't have Australian chickens because they kill anybody who tries to do anything with them.
Oh yeah, you don't muck around with the Aussie chickens, mate. They're right behind the drop bears. Right. Yep, dangerous as. Justin's going, what the fuck is a drop bear? It's all right.
No, everything in Australia will kill you. We all understand that. So
that's the in joke, apparently, Justin. That
I've heard that before, actually, not from here.
Yeah. Have you ever made any or had any inclination to come and visit us down under at some point, Justin?
I have not been, but I would like to, yes.
Well, there you go. You got an open invitation. There you go.
Oh,
That's what he was waiting for, Vin, right?
Yeah, an open invitation from Vin, barbecue and beer out on the deck. There you go. All right, now we've got completely sidetracked. Let's discuss some of the emerging technologies. Now, MIDI 2, Justin. Now, this is Pete's wheelhouse because Pete is the chair of the MIDI 2 org. Have you made any moves in implementing that at the moment?
Not yet.
Right. Okay.
That's a really quick answer.
That was there's a pregnant pause.
Yeah. So plans?
I can't say that we have any specific plans, which is not a no plans to the negative or yet the positive, but yeah.
Justin, I'm a very delicate person, and you're going to make me cry if you say that you have no plans for the future. So,
well, we don't. Plans are not fun, and we kind of operate more on the interesting things that we have in front of us, and plans just like then you have to then you have schedules, and then inevitably you have meetings.
Yes,
and so it's just we'll see what happens. I think is the answer ultimately.
Cool. So what I'm hearing, Vin, is yes, Justin's going to do it. He just doesn't want a meeting about it. He just wants to do it.
Yeah, no meetings. Just well, I suppose you're going to have some form of meeting with John, Schwa, and go, hey, listen, do you think maybe we should have a look at this MIDI 2 thing?
No, we don't do things like that in meeting form. We we have a more asynchronous sort of process.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, Linux, so ALSA's got it and macOS has it, and ours will be available soon. So
all right,
be a good time to look at it.
Yeah, it might be a bit of a chicken and egg thing, Pete,
Yeah. I have a few MIDI 2 synthesizers here. I've got the Iridium that's got the updated firmware, and the Montage, and the Roland A88 controller and stuff like that. So
yeah. No, but I'm just saying chicken and egg, as in it's not fully implemented in Windows yet.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Any particular hardware you would recommend?
The Montage is pretty good. It has a very complete implementation. Native Instruments, their new stuff has an implementation, but it's not fully fleshed out yet. Is probably the best way to look at it. But if you can manage a Montage, they're really good.
Good to know. All right, thanks.
The new Montage M, I think it is.
All right.
Thank you, Vin. Your check's in the mail.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was MIDI 2. There's a couple of others, and I'll just run them past you real quick. And if you sigh, then that's a trigger for me not to go any further.
Take a deep breath.
Take a deep breath. Ready?
All right.
Clap plugin support. No, that doesn't mean clap. That's actually quite good. Who was that? Was that you, Justin?
Sorry, that's not a question. That's just a random combination of words, I think.
Yeah, that was a statement. So the question is, I'm pretty sure you guys did actually implement clap. And
we did.
It's in there.
Yeah, and the interesting backstory of that, for me at least, was that one of the other DAW developers that we've had on the show, he actually contacted me and said, hey, listen, do you think you can help me get in touch with Justin? Regards clap. I've gone, yeah, because apparently he was having trouble getting a response from you guys. And I was actually typing out an email and to do an introduction for you guys. And then I got another email back while I was typing, and he said, it's okay, Schwa's just landed on the channel. What do they call it? A Discord? Is it a Discord channel? Something like that. So
yeah.
And during Schwa's interview that I was watching, he was mentioning clap. So do you have any thoughts on that as a protocol?
Well, it's nice to have a plugin standard that is both free for anyone to implement and also not entirely dependent on the RDF turtle thing. I guess, and have it be more dynamic ultimately. like LV2, which is another free plugin format, which LV2 is actually, there's a lot to like about it, but it is sort of, it takes this sort of extensibility angle to a ridiculous extreme that is kind of a pain in the ass. But as far as clap goes, yeah, it's nice to have another standard. The thread pooling extension is pretty useful and advantageous. And yeah, we're happy to be supporting it.
Yeah. I mean, it's one that I'm watching, but I don't know how many plugin developers have actually jumped on. Now, there's more and more of them.
Yeah.
Justin, have you been monitoring that at all, or are you just gone, no, well, you know?
We only really pay attention to things like that if there's, a compatibility issue.
Right.
And then to the extent that there is, then, we see if we've done something wrong, which is usually, can often be the case. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I've got one other .DAW project. There was some discussion of that. I can't even remember who actually presented that. I think it's like a file format to be able to share projects between different DAWs. Do you know much about that one at all, Justin?
Oh, yeah. We looked at it briefly, and honestly, converting session formats between DAWs is such a lossy premise to begin with that it was something that we were like, it's not really worth the effort. And I think since our format's pretty much, it's not well documented, but it's ultimately self-documenting. I think someone made a plugin or a converter tool that apparently worked all right. I haven't actually played with it, but
the .DAW project stuff, I think, was also, and I'm going to mispronounce his name, Klaus from Bitwig, if I remember correctly.
Claus.
Yeah,
you're right. In Santa Claus.
Wait, Vin, you pronounced something correctly that I couldn't pronounce?
No, well, if you remember on that show, that was like an in-joke all the way through the show because I kept pronouncing it 3 different ways all the way through. And then he started calling me Vim by the end of it, Oh, boy. Yeah, so Claus. I say, is that the DAW project is part of... I thought it was somehow associated with the same group of guys that were doing clap. So am I...
Yeah. Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Right. Okay. All right. I suppose, where are we?
Well, I think it would be good to ask about kind of what's the future for Reaper in this case.
Yeah. Justin?
We're going to, it's been... was it 2024? So it's been almost 20 years of development. Yeah. And I think it's going to be kind of more of the same. But, my whole feeling on plans,
we don't have any.
We do have, a pre-release forum on our website, on our forums. And then from there, we have a link to a pre-release site where we have builds of Reaper that are in development. So if people are really interested in seeing what's coming next and more importantly in testing it and optionally giving feedback, that is something that we're very open about. We don't have any, we have some ground rules as far as, trying to keep the conversation about the new things, confined to the forum that we have. But other than that, we allow anyone who wants to test for us and to see what's coming before it's there. And sometimes we have things that in development builds that don't get used. Sometimes we have them sit around in development builds for months on end, getting tested and getting evolving as we get feedback and so forth. So it is, it's something that's probably better experienced rather than talked about. And I guess people should be aware of that. And then the other thing to keep in mind also on those is probably best not to use them in front of customers or for live events that you are worried about. And you know, those builds also, like, sometimes we will remove features that we decide we don't like. So, you know, you don't get too attached. That would be the other advice.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, builds the releases that go out, it'd be very, very rare that we remove things from those. So.
Yeah. And just on that point, that whole development area, it's essentially it's an open beta, it's a public beta. So unlike, you know, a lot of the other software companies, I don't know any other DAW company that doesn't have a closed beta, for example, and it's, you know, it's almost like a secret society, you know, to get actually even in there. So where you guys have always been completely open in what you're doing, and you know, different development branches and all the rest of it, and it's available to anyone publicly, which is,
it's refreshing.
Yeah, we shouldn't understate that, Justin. That's pretty huge, and you've done that pretty much from the start, haven't you?
Yeah, and I mean, you know, it's primarily I could give you a speech about, you know, being open to all people and all that stuff, but really it's just because we're lazy, and, you know, to have some sort of closed thing would be so much work, you know. Whereas as it is now, we just you know, it's self-selecting. It works great.
You might need a meeting for that, I guess. Right?
Oh yeah. Could you imagine having a beta group meeting, Justin?
But really, it's that, you know, we really like making Reaper, and so it's to the extent that we can spend all of our time doing that and occasionally going on podcasts, then, you know, like that's all it takes, really.
Yeah. So the team, as far as the development team, there's yourself and John Schwartz, or AKA Schwa. Who else is there's Ollie? I was looking through the Cocos, you know, employee list. So you've got Ollie. What's his role? Is he does support stuff? Does he?
Yeah. I mean, we all end up doing a lot of different things, but Ollie takes care of a lot of the support side of the business, and you know, yeah, and also, yeah, a bunch of business related things ultimately too.
Yep.
Which is very nice. And yeah, he's awesome. Everybody who I work with I'm very, very fortunate to have such a great group of people to be a part of. Yeah.
Yeah. So White Tie is another name that is integral to the Reaper development. So he's the graphics artist. He's the GUI guy.
Yeah, he's very, very talented, and actually every major version he does a new theme, and he's been programming more, developing these like theme adjusters, which are ways to customize the default theme. And that's all him. Actually, a few versions ago, we released the theme adjuster for the version 7 theme, which he made, which is really great and lets you customize all kinds of things about the UI, like what's visible, what's not, how things are arranged, the colors, the contrast, you know, all these different things. It's pretty cool seeing him make all of that.
Yeah,
and yeah.
Hey, I've got one real quick question. Just on the Reaper 7 GUI, now I haven't spent a lot of time in it, but the first thing, I was like running in it just in a remote install at the moment. And when I opened one of the sessions, the actual mixer was just massive. It was like everything had elephantitis. I don't know what. And it was just like the default GUI setting that just wouldn't render correctly. I wonder what that was. And a few others have actually ran into the same problem, only in 7.
Well, to the extent that you could provide like some screenshots or anything like that, that would probably be helpful.
I'll do that.
Beyond that, hard to say. Maybe there was something having to do with multiple displays where some are high DPI and some are not. There could be all kinds of things.
Vin hitting you up for support on the podcast here. I don't know, Vin.
This is not a very, very detailed bug report, I think.
What? a mixer looks like it's got elephantitis. Come on.
Yeah.
I think what it was is that for some reason it had a default to a 4K setting or something somehow.
All right.
But that's not anything that I did. But it was, it was just, I will send you the screenshot. One last thing, your thoughts on the current landscape with music technology in general. So, and I suppose that's going to include AI as well. And I mean, it doesn't mean necessarily that there's going to be any AI features implemented in Reaper, but do you have any kind of general thoughts of music technology and where AI is actually impacting the music industry?
I mean, we'll see is my feeling on it. AI is interesting in that the copyright implications are going to be very complex.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, if you produce anything with it, it isn't copyrightable currently. So that's good, I think.
Yeah.
Because I think only humans can make things that are copyrighted.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the features that exist in the world for extracting stems are pretty cool. And I can see a lot of people finding them useful, but I don't know if it's something that I personally care about. And yeah, so that will be interesting to see. You know, that is an interesting side of it, I should say.
Yeah, I think with AI, there's two sides of it. There's generative and there's creative. And we've discussed this on multiple other podcasts as well, where, and just to explain that quickly, where generative is, you know, what we're actually seeing with, you know, these song creators, and that's what you're hinting or mentioning, the copyright
right. Yeah.
Infringement thing is going to be very interesting to watch play out.
Well, I mean, there's the copyright infringement, and then there's also the fact that the things that are produced by generative AI are not copyrightable to begin with.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Someone could make something brilliant with it, and then they don't actually own it because no one owns it.
Yep. But the creative side of it, I mean, I use it pretty much on every podcast, you know, noise cancellation and reduction stuff. I mean, some of those plugins that I use are quite amazing.
Yeah, Vin's actually asleep. He's not here at the moment. That's just his AI.
That's just my AI, yeah. Yeah, listen, Pete.
It's actually on a train, I think.
Don't get too cheeky, Pete, because I'm always having to get rid of whatever you've got going on in the background, whether it's, today we...
the guy's laying tile upstairs.
Yeah, that was quite novel, but just your there's always like a background level of noise that gets completely eliminated by some AI tools that I have.
It does a great job.
I make you sound pristine, Pete.
You do, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, there you go.
Because I sound like ass otherwise, so.
Yeah, right. All right, well, Justin, I think unless you've got anything else that you'd kind of want to add, I think we probably could wind this up.
All right.
Yeah, Justin's got a meeting he has to run to, so
totally.
Okay. Look, on that note, thank you very much, guys, for all your time and energy today. That's been fun as per usual.
Justin, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Anytime. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Justin, and thanks for such a great DAW. I must say, I love Reaper. I'm a massive Reaper fanboy. It's
thank
amazing.
you. That's very nice to hear.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Okay. And I think with that, on to the next.